Elias Kane never expected to survive another mission. And yet here he was, tumbling out of his ship like a sack of defective bolts onto a planet that looked like someone had spilled liquid opal across the horizon. His left boot caught on a jagged rock that had apparently been watching him with malice, and he flailed spectacularly, arms windmilling, until he landed on his back with a soft thud. A nearby cluster of creatures, three-legged, iridescent, and oddly expressive, paused to observe him. One of them tilted its head in what Elias could only assume was judgment. "Yeah, I see you too," he muttered, wincing as his ribs reminded him they weren't done being sore. The alien city rose before him, a chaotic tangle of spires and floating platforms, each one glowing with colors that refused to be named in any human language. He glanced at his wrist console, which had already given up and started projecting a holographic shrug. Great, he thought, even technology had started mocking him. He adjusted his helmet, ignoring the scraping noises his armor made, and trudged forward, trying to look like a competent soldier instead of a stumbling disaster. And then he saw her, the alien queen. She was tall, impossibly poised, her skin gleaming like polished mahogany under the strange sunlight. Her ears stretched upward and outward with such elegance that Elias immediately decided he would never be able to grow them even half that stylish. Her eyes held entire galaxies, if the poetic reports from the intel officers were true. But now that he was staring at them, he wasn't sure anyone could have prepared him for the feeling of being entirely, awkwardly, unworthy awe. Elias attempted a formal military bow and failed spectacularly. His knees buckled, his helmet went flying, and somehow he ended up on his hands and knees, chest first, presenting his torso to her without intention. His scars, the physical proof of decades spent fighting wars humans conveniently forgot, stretched across his ribs and shoulders like a map of every bad decision he'd ever made. The Queen's reaction was not horror, not fear, not even polite disinterest. She blinked, tilted her head, and then let out a soft, musical laugh that made Elias freeze. "You are amusing," she said, her voice melodic, with an undertone of curiosity that made him feel simultaneously studied and accepted. The translator buzzed softly. "Courage is beautiful in all forms." Elias coughed awkwardly. "Courage, more like a combination of bad balance and poor life choices," he muttered under his breath, earning another laugh that echoed through the hall in a way that made the floating lights jitter with delight. Her attendants, a line of tall, elegant beings with similarly extended ears, watched him with a mix of fascination and suspicion. One of them handed him a glowing drink that pulsed in sync with his heartbeat. He frowned, and the liquid immediately shifted to a bright, insistent purple. "Oh, come on," he muttered. "Even my beverages judge me now." The Queen laughed again, the sound spilling warmth across the room in a way that made Elias think maybe some galactic crises could be softened by sheer absurdity. They led him through halls that seemed to defy geometry, some twisting upward, others folding back on themselves, until they reached a chamber that hummed with low-energy fields and holographic projections of distant star systems. The Queen gestured toward him. "Show me your scars," she said simply, not figuratively, not metaphorically, literally. "Well," Elias replied, running a hand over the jagged lines along his ribs, "I suppose someone should see them before they become abstract art in a therapist's waiting room." As he spoke, he realized that he wasn't just recounting battle wounds. He was talking about nights spent haunted by failures, moments when he'd held his friends' hands as they took their last breath, and the emotional scars that never healed. The Queen's eyes softened, and for the first time in years, Elias felt unguarded. He made a joke about how one of his scars looked suspiciously like a bad attempt at a map to the nearest pub, and the Queen laughed, an actual laugh, not a formal courtesy. It was contagious. Even the hovering lights seemed to shimmer in amusement. Over the next hours, Elias discovered that the Queen had a sense of humor that was dangerously charming. She admitted that she had once vaporized an ambassador's favorite pet by accident during a diplomatic demonstration involving anti-gravity fields. He nearly fell off a hovering bench laughing. Somehow this woman, this ruler of an entire species, found ways to weave absurdity into protocol to make diplomacy feel like a game of cosmic hide-and-seek. By the end of the day, Elias and the Queen had formed an unlikely understanding. It wasn't friendship, not exactly. It was something stranger, more profound. He had offered her his scars, both visible and invisible, and in return, she had offered empathy, humor, and a partnership that might just save more than one species. And as the alien city glowed beneath the twin suns, Elias Kane, human soldier and accidental comedian, realized that the galaxy had just handed him the strangest mission of his life. Survive, connect, and somehow make royalty laugh while everything else tried to kill them both. Elias woke to the gentle hum of the city, or maybe it was just the headache from the anti-gravity drink that had pulsed in time with his heartbeat all night. The Queen was already there, sitting cross-legged on a floating platform, her long ears twitching as if negotiating a secret argument with the air itself. "You look like a warrior who survived a black hole and lost a wrestling match to it," she said, voice teasing, eyes glinting with amusement. Elias groaned, rubbing his temples. "I'll have you know it was a very noble defeat." She tilted her head and made a noise that sounded suspiciously like laughter through an interstellar translator, which somehow made him feel both judged and oddly appreciated. Their first official meeting was a lesson in alien bureaucracy, which, if Elias were being honest, made human military paperwork look like child's play. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing star systems Elias couldn't pronounce and fleets he had no hope of remembering. Each motion the Queen made caused the displays to swirl in mesmerizing patterns, occasionally forming a starship that looked like it had been doodled by a very enthusiastic child. "Do they always put in abstract art?" Elias asked, squinting at a spinning vessel that bore a suspicious resemblance to a giant rubber duck. The Queen blinked and let out a musical chuckle. "The important thing," she said, "is that the enemy never knows whether we are serious or simply fond of geometric whimsy." Elias scribbled a mental note. "Next time, bring crayons." When the conversation shifted to the impending threat, a biomechanical swarm that had already devoured several uninhabited systems, Elias braced for the usual grim briefing. Instead, the Queen, with a sly tilt of her head, suggested a strategy session involving practical jokes. "Confuse them," she said simply, "then hit them." Elias nearly snorted. "You're serious?" "Absolutely. Confusion is a weapon," she replied, ears flicking in what he assumed was her version of a smirk. Elias realized, with a mixture of relief and dread, that he had signed up for the galaxy's first prank-based military alliance. Training with her people was an exercise in absurdity disguised as preparation. One drill involved simulating ambushes with holographic decoys that, when hit, emitted ridiculous noises ranging from sneezing kittens to dramatic soap opera screams. Elias tripped over at least 6 of these in a single morning, earning applause from the Queen and muffled snickers from her attendants. Another exercise required him to pilot a small starfighter while reciting poetry about the moral dilemmas of interstellar bureaucracy. He failed spectacularly, nearly flying into a floating library of alien knowledge, but again, laughter prevailed, and he survived. By the 3rd day, he began to suspect that humor was less about morale and more about testing adaptability under pressure. During a quieter moment, the Queen shared stories from her own past. She described battles that spanned light years, fleets lost to gravitational anomalies, and the loneliness of leadership that humans were generally too dramatic to fully understand. Then, unexpectedly, she recounted the time she accidentally turned her favorite translator into a sentient jelly-like being while experimenting with a language protocol. Elias nearly choked on a synthetic protein snack, laughing so hard that the gelatinous ambassador, apparently self-aware now, waved a quivering pseudopod in solidarity. Humor, he realized, wasn't just a coping mechanism for these aliens. It was a form of communication, a subtle weapon that could unnerve enemies or allies alike. It was during one of these training exercises that the first warning of the swarm arrived. Sensors, tuned to detect the smallest distortions in space-time, began flashing erratically. The Queen's ears flicked sharply, her eyes narrowing in thought. Elias, feeling the familiar tension creep up his spine, muttered, "Well, here comes the universe to ruin another perfectly good day." She smirked. "Exactly, and we will ruin it right back." In the ensuing hours, they coordinated their first combined human-Glecian patrol, a motley fleet of sleek alien vessels and heavily armored human ships. The human pilots complained about the lack of coffee, while the aliens communicated in clicks and melodic tones that sounded like a very complicated jazz song. Elias made jokes about needing a translator just for the music. The Queen laughed, and somehow that laughter became a shield against fear, a reminder that even in the face of annihilation, absurdity could hold power. By the end of the day, Elias realized he was no longer just a soldier stranded on an alien planet. He was part of a coalition, however improbable, led by a ruler whose understanding of empathy and humor rivaled his own desperate attempts to stay sane. The queen, noticing his tired grin, flicked her ears and whispered, "Do you know why we will win?" Elias shook his head. "Because we're lucky." "No," she said with a grin, "because you wear your scars like maps, and maps always lead somewhere." Elias laughed despite himself, thinking that the galaxy might be terrifying, absurd, and chaotic, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was finally starting to make sense in the strangest way. The fleet trembled on the edge of the star system like a nervous heartbeat, a mix of human dread and alien precision held in uneasy harmony. Elias Kane gripped the console of his hybrid starfighter, the glyphs along its hull glowing in rhythm with his pulse. Around him, Gleesian ships hummed and clicked in a language of lights and sound that felt like music to the untrained ear, but was tactical genius in practice. The Queen's voice crackled in his earpiece, calm but teasing. "Try not to crash into the existential threat today, soldier." Elias snorted. "No promises," he muttered, though a corner of his mouth twitched into a grin. Humor, he realized, was as essential as armor now. The swarm arrived like a living storm of metal and hunger biomechanical entities that devoured matter with the casual indifference of a child raiding a candy store. Elias barked commands, dodging tendrils of machinery that had a disturbing knack for dramatic entrances. One clawed at a Gleesian cruiser, only to recoil when the ship emitted a barrage of holographic decoys, projecting an entire army of laughing, dancing duplicates. Elias couldn't help but laugh himself. "I've seen clowns scarier than these things," he muttered, weaving through the chaos. The Queen's ears flicked sharply, her laughter joining his, a strangely comforting anchor amid the carnage. They struck the swarm with a combination of brute force and ingenuity. Human firepower smashed open hulls while Gleesian tech manipulated gravity fields, causing the invaders to tumble into each other like cosmic bowling pins. Every misstep by the swarm was exaggerated with a flash or a squeal that made it absurd, like a high-tech cartoon designed to terrify and entertain at once. Elias found himself improvising constantly, firing from unexpected angles, baiting the swarm with his own ship while coordinating with the Queen's fleet through witty banter that somehow kept morale high. It was chaos, it was brilliant, and somehow it worked. During a lull in the fighting, Elias caught sight of the Queen aboard her flagship. She was orchestrating attacks with precision, ears flicking like banners in a storm, eyes twinkling with mischief and strategy. He realized with startling clarity that she had become not just an ally, but a mirror for his own growth. Once he had believed scars were weaknesses, proof of failure. Now he understood they were tools, maps guiding him through impossible situations, reminders that survival demanded empathy, humor, and creativity. He grinned. "Guess my map-reading skills finally came in handy." The Queen's laugh, musical and resonant, confirmed she agreed. The final wave of the swarm surged, larger and more aggressive than any before. Elias' fighter shuddered under impact, alarms screaming like manic symphonies. He took a breath, scanning for weak points, when he noticed the pattern. The swarm responded to predictability, and predictability was the exact opposite of what humans and Gleesians excelled at together. "Time for plan improvised and probably terrible," he muttered, launching a sequence of maneuvers that defied physics and common sense. The Queen's ships mirrored him, each following cues that were part instinct, part humor-infused logic. The swarm hesitated, confused by the audacity, and that pause was all they needed. With a coordinated strike, a blend of energy beams, gravity traps, and improvisational comedy, Elias literally rigged one ship to play loud mocking laughter over a hollow projector. The swarm began to collapse inward. Each biomechanical unit tangled with another, self-destruct sequences, cascading in a chain reaction that made the entire engagement feel like a fireworks display of absurdity and triumph. When the last invader disintegrated into the void, silence fell, punctuated only by the distant hum of surviving ships and the Queen's soft chuckle over the comms. "I told you maps lead somewhere." Elias exhaled, staring at the floating remnants, realizing the galaxy hadn't just been saved. It had been transformed by connection, creativity, and resilience. Back on Gliesa 9X, Elias stepped out of his battered fighter, boots crunching on alien terrain that now felt familiar. The Queen awaited him, ears flicking in amusement as he approached, a grin tugging at his lips. "You survived," she said, voice warm, and somehow made it entertaining. Elias laughed, tugging at the edge of a scar he had once thought shameful. Turns out scars have a sense of humor too, he replied. She extended a hand, graceful, steady, and he shook it, realizing he had crossed more than interstellar distances. He had crossed the distance between fear and courage, between isolation and empathy. The coalition celebrated, humans and Gleesians alike, sharing jokes, food, and stories of missteps that now seemed heroic. Elias found himself telling tales of battlefield blunders that made alien officers laugh until their ears twitched uncontrollably. For the first time, he felt at home in the galaxy, not just surviving it. The Queen joined him, a rare private moment amid the celebration. "You've changed," she said softly. "You've learned what courage truly is." Elias looked at his scars, then at the stars that had once seemed endless and threatening. "I guess courage comes with laughter," he said, "and maybe a little chaos." She laughed, and he realized that the universe, vast and unpredictable as it was, had room for growth, humor, and unlikely heroes. As the stars stretched across the horizon, Elias Kane finally understood that survival wasn't enough. Connection, empathy, and the audacity to laugh at the absurdity of existence were what shaped legends. He glanced at the Queen, her ears flicking like cosmic flags, and knew that together they had not just fought a swarm. They had rewritten what it meant to face the galaxy, scars and all. And in that moment, the weight of every battle, every laugh, every failure, and every triumph coalesced into something that didn't just feel like survival, it felt like home. The galaxy was still vast, dangerous, hilariously unpredictable. And now, for the first time, Elias Kane was ready for all of it.